evening and welcome to the second of four forums with candidates for office for November 3rd that are being brought to you by Cayuga Community College and the Citizen, as well as shown on ARMA, the Auburn Regional Media Access, Spectrum, Verizon Fios, as well as the college's radio station 89.1. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. On November 3rd, voters across the nation go to vote for president and members of the House of Representatives. That seems to be what everybody's talking about. But there are all the members of the New York State Legislature up this year, including the 63 members of the Senate and 150 members of the Assembly. Cayuga County has 3 Senate seats. One is the 54th, and there's an incumbent running there, Senator Pamela Helming. She was in the studio 2 weeks ago. One is the 50th, that has been vacant since January of 2020, with the resignation of first-term Senator Robert Antonacci, who left the Senate after 1 year to take a seat on the state Supreme Court. We have a forum for the 3rd seat right now, the 51st Senate District, that is open for the first time in more than 30 years. That is because Senator James Stewart is not seeking re-election this year, and he has been the incumbent covering Cayuga County on and off since 1986. The 51st District is a large district. We were talking to the gentleman who you'll hear from in a few minutes, and maybe the second largest district in the state. There are 9 counties. That includes the parts of 9 counties, or all of 9 counties. It includes the towns of Locke, Moravia, Wasco, Niles, Sempronius, and Summerhill here in Cayuga County. This year we do have both candidates running for the 51st Senate District, Democrat Jim Barber, and he's facing Peter Oberacker, who is on the Republican, Conservative, and Independent Party lines. And I'd like to welcome both of them to the studio. With the COVID-19 worldwide pandemic, we've had to change a couple of things with our forums that don't usually occur in the studio. One, for example, is Jeremy Boyer, the executive editor of The Citizen, will be online, but he will not be in the studio for safety purposes, so that we can keep the number of people in the studio smaller. He writes a weekly column that appears on the editorial pages of The Citizen, and he'll ask the candidates questions today. We've also done away with the official timekeeper that usually will give time. I will keep time for the candidates, and we've worked out a system where they can see when they have 30 seconds or they have to stop their comments. But I'll play that role today. Our candidates are sitting in the order of their opening statements. They are they are starting with Jim Barber, who is a Democrat, and then Peter Oberacker, who is the Republican, Conservative, and Independence Party candidate. Again, welcome to the studio. We'll start off with your 2-minute opening statements. We'll hear from Mr. Barber, who's on the Democratic line. Sir.
Well, before I begin, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone. Thank you, Guy and Mr. Boyer, for being here, and Cayuga County Community College for hosting the event, and the cameramen, and thank you, Mr. Oberacker, for joining us here today. So, my name is Jim Barber. I'm a lifetime farmer on a 6th-generation farm. I learned from my parents the importance of serving your community. I've served on several local committees, elected to the local school board. I've also been elected to several leadership positions in statewide organizations. I served 2 years as special assistant to the New York Commissioner of Agriculture, and I served 8 years as in 2009, I earned a presidential appointment to head the New York Farm Service Agency for the USDA. I'm running now for state senate to make sure New York State is a place where people can afford to live, work, and retire, a place where people can find good jobs, a place where you can afford to run a business and have the infrastructure and the good, well-trained workforce to make that business a success, a place where you can find the help that you need to be a successful business. I have a plan to make that happen. It begins with fixing a broken tax system that gives tremendous tax breaks and rebates to Wall Street, while at the same time overburdening our upstate homeowners and businesses with the highest property taxes in the country. Those taxes are high because Albany forces unfunded mandates onto our counties and our schools. My plan creates a fair tax system, taking the burden off of our counties so that we can have the resources to invest in our local communities and make it easier for people to live here and run businesses here, and free up those resources to invest in our first responders, law enforcement, and community services. We need to make sure that we can afford to make upstate New York a place where we can live and work and retire. Thank you, and I look forward to the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. We'll now hear from Peter Oberacker, who is on the Republican, Conservative, and Independence Party lines. Welcome to the studio, sir.
Thank you, Guy, and thank you, Jeremy, for taking the time out of your busy day to assist us in this, and thank you, Jim, for coming all the way up here to Cayuga and engaging in the debate. So I am a first-generation German sausage maker. My father came from Frankfurt, Germany, and was a sausage maker who moved upstate New York when we were about 6 years old. Worked in the family business until I went to a ag school, Delhi Ag and Tech. Graduated in the early 80s, and have since moved into my own company, which is Formtech Solutions, Inc. We do research and development and product development for food companies. The thing I'm the proudest over is that back in 2017, we moved our corporate headquarters, which was located in College Station, Texas, and we moved it to Schenevus, New York. First business to go back into the town of Maryland in almost 30 years. I am a former board member for the town of Maryland, former town supervisor for the town of Maryland, and current Otsego County legislator overseeing 4 towns in Otsego County. I am a member of my local fire department, volunteer firefighter, EMS provider as well. So I think what is really key here moving forward, and where I feel I can be the greatest benefit to the 51st District moving forward, is what's going to take is a business approach and a legislative approach to deal with the issues that we see in Albany. A top-down version where things are pushed down upon local municipalities, I know very well, being a former town supervisor and current legislator. We need to adjust it from a bottom up. We need to listen to the stakeholders. And I believe if we do that, we will be able to lay the foundation to change what I see as a systemic problem in Albany. So thank you. Look forward to the debate.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. We're now going to have Jeremy Boyer ask you questions, as we said at the top of the forum. He can ask them of either of you or both of them. We'll switch back and forth. Mr. Boyer, welcome to the studio from a distance.
Thank you very much, and thanks to both of you for coming over to do this with us today. I appreciate it, and I know the viewers and the residents in Cayuga County do as well. And my first question for both of you is, the fact that this is such a sprawling district, and you're both residents well to the east of Auburn and Cayuga County. So I imagine before you jumped into this campaign, your exposure to the people and the issues of this county has been limited, especially with the pandemic going on. So my question to both of you is, if you can just describe how have you tried to connect with the people in this county, and based on that, what do you view as the top Cayuga County specific issues that residents here would like to have addressed at the state level?
Okay. We'll hear from Mr. Oberacker first. You'll have 2 minutes on this.
Sure, thank you. So we have traveled extensively in the 51st. We have been absolutely engaged with the folks here in Cayuga County, working through our brethren, if you will, from our firefighter and EMS squads. It is a kind of a capillary, it's kind of a mainstream into the society, into the city, and into the issues that we see here in the 51st. One of the issues is first responders. I think it's huge. I have some personal experience with that, with something that happened to my son, and the mandates that are coming down from Albany are stifling our ability to react within our first responder within our first responders in the squads and their ability to actually make these calls. So that's one of the first things. The other thing is looking at one of the major employers, in the area, which is, of course, the corrections side, and with the bail reform issue that has come up, and the effects of bail reform on that potentially, I think, could be devastating. We are engaged, we are locked into that issue, and will be supporting the reform and repeal of the bail reform, which has just been a disaster as far as upstate New York goes. You got to get out and meet the people, and we've done that. We've traveled heavily here in the eastern part of the 51st. My company is a company that does business worldwide, so the 51st isn't as big when I encompass the world, if you will, that we do business.
Thank you. Mr. Barber, how have you connected with Cayuga County in this part of the district, and what are the top issues you see?
Yes, well, I have made several trips out here. I was actually in this race last summer, so I was out here last fall a couple of times, and several trips this year once the COVID started lightening up. And the thing is, a lot of the issues facing upstate New York are the same, across all of upstate. Taxes, broadband service, cell service. Being near the Finger Lakes, I know water quality is a very important issue in this part of the in this county. And what I've learned, because I also have the New York City watershed in part of my district, that we have very effective ways to deal with water quality issues using, and farms can be a real partner in that process. New York City has the best water system, the best water in the world, in an unfiltered water system. And they've learned over the years that well-managed farmland is actually the best land use in a watershed. So we can implement a program where we could actually work with farmers, provide revenue for our farm community, because they are struggling just to survive, and we know agriculture is a huge component of the economy upstate. They can be partners as we move toward making sure we have clean water, dealing with climate change issues, healthy soils. It's called Payments Ecosystem Benefits, and Cornell is studying this program. We can implement it. It's a revenue stream for farmers doing the good environmental work that they're already doing. It's an incentive to do better, and it will be a source of income for farms that we can actually help our farms survive and thrive in the years ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Boyer?
All right. Well, I appreciate, we'll try to touch on a couple of the issues you both brought up a little later on in terms of cash bail changes as well as water quality here in Cayuga County. But I wanted to ask you both, before we get into some of the specific issues, about the shoes you're trying to fill. This is a district that's been represented by the same person, State Senator James Seward, for more than 3 decades. So people here know him real well. And based on that, I'd like you to compare yourself to Senator Seward. In what ways do you think you would be similar to him in terms of philosophy or approach to the job? And in what ways would you be different? What changes would you bring?
Mr. Barber?
Well, I am certainly going to work just as hard, if not harder, getting out to every part of this district. It's a huge district, but very important to hear from all the voters, every opinion, every side of the issues. That's how we address issues in the state, is making sure that you hear from everyone. Jim Seward was so effective at representing this district and bringing resources back to this district because for 30 years he was inside the majority party in the Senate conference. Those are the folks making the decisions about the laws that impact upstate New York. Dynamics have changed. Now, if we want to be represented in the Senate effectively, you need to have a seat at the table with the Senate majority where the decisions are being made, so you can build those alliances that are going to be so important to make sure that everything that goes on and the decisions that are being made in impacting upstate New York are, in fact, we are there to make sure that upstate priorities, upstate issues, upstate values are protected and looked after inside the Senate.
Thank you. Mr. Oberacker. Rocker, the issue of how you compare and contrast to Jim Seward, who started here in 1986, 87.
1986, that's correct. I guess one of the first things I would bring up is that I'm endorsed by Jim. I don't think Jim would just arbitrarily throw that endorsement around if he didn't believe that I would not only emulate but take forward the system and the absolute great job that he has put forward here for 34 years in District 51. He called me. He was the one who reached out to me and asked me to consider running for his seat. So I think that speaks volumes, again, with a man who has spent this much time and absolutely representing the people of the 51st in an exemplary manner. One of the things I feel very proud of is I've reached out to his staff, and if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, they will stay on and help us continue that effort. So come January, we will be able to hit the ground running. The vast knowledge that they possess will just make us so much more efficient. And I believe I'm a center-of-the-road politician. I've shown that in my ability to legislate at the county level, reaching across the aisle to my Democratic colleagues and working on things. We have a 7-7 split board in Otsego County, so to get anything done, and as Chair of Public Works, some of the things that I've done to improve our conditions in the county, you have to reach across the aisle, and I've done so. I think that really speaks for itself. I believe that you will see a seamless transition, and then with my business background and prowess, I believe we can take the situations here in the 51st to a new level.
Thank you. Mr. Boyer.
Well, I know everyone admires Senator Seward's service and contributions to the district and to the state, but some will also point to 36 years for an elected official and say that's way too long, and we shouldn't have career politicians. So it always brings up the question, do you support term limits? And so I'm just going to put that to both of you. Do you support term limits for state legislators? Why or why not? And if by chance you do, what would those limits be in your mind? What would be the right limit to put on it?
Mr. Oberacker.
Well, some would say effectively every 2 years you do have a referendum on term limits when you go to the ballot box, and it's a 2-year term. So there is some movement afoot to say that with a term limit you set a time, you start to work, you have an end point in the mix, and the first 2 years in any office, speaking again from experience from being a county legislator, you're learning the ropes. You're learning the system, so to speak. I believe now into my third term, 6 years in, that you become an effective legislator. And I think if I were to set a limit on term limits, I think 3 terms, 3 2-year terms, would be in the neighborhood of what I would look at. But again, I go back to every 2 years, there's a referendum put out there for term limits.
Thank you. Mr. Barber, the issue of term limits.
Well, I think actually a more effective solution would be to get rid of the horrible gerrymandering that's going on in the state. And this district is a perfect example. It's a gerrymandering, it's a district drawn to keep the incumbent in office. It's drawn for the politician, not for the people. We need to end that. Let's have a system that actually creates fair, diverse districts so that you have to represent several points of view, not just worried about the one that's putting you in office every 2 years. So let's fix the way we draw our districts so it makes it more fair for the towns and the representatives and stops this process of making sure that politicians get reelected every year. More importantly, I think more than term limits, because as term limits are going to take out good representatives as well as ones that have been there too long. That's what the elections are for. But that's why we need a system that actually creates a fair distribution of viewpoints within a district. And inside the Senate itself, let's put term limits on the chair leaderships of the different committees. That's where they're really garnering a lot of power. There's no reason in the world why the chair of the Senate Insurance Committee should be receiving huge contributions and campaign donations from the insurance companies. That has to end. We need to get rid of the corruption in Albany, and I think that will go a lot more way to having effective representation in Albany than term limits. That's what the voters, they can decide what they want to do. Let's fix the parts of this system that are broken, that keeps incumbents in office too long, and really fosters that corrupt money in politics, where the big money kind of is in the pockets of the politicians and gets them reelected every year.
Thank you. Mr. Boyer, or excuse me, Mr. Oberacker, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I wanted to know if you wanted to follow up with that, with a rebuttal at all. I saw you making notes, and that's what I was asking.
Yeah, no, I'm
Okay.
fine. Yep, thank you. Nope,
Sorry.
thank
Mr. Boyer.
All right. Well, I know, Mr. Barber, you brought it up a little bit in one of your earlier answers, but I wanted to ask you both about the issue of the majority versus the minority conference and how that should weigh on voters' minds. Now, to be frank, all signs point to Democrats keeping a majority in the Senate in 2021. But the question is, should that influence how voters choose in this race? And I'd like to hear you both talk about that.
Mr. Barber, you'll be going first.
All right. Well, yeah, because the reality is, I mean, that's how things, function in government. Parties have a focus on what they want to accomplish, and you need to work. That's how the the decisions are really made. You can ask any Republican in the Assembly or any Democrat that was in the Senate prior to this. Nothing happens if you're not in the majority party. So to be an effective voice for your district, to be able to represent our needs, our values, you're much more effective working inside the majority party to make sure that what we need is being considered and heard and part of the discussion at the table. If you're not at the table with the Senate leadership, you're just kind of waiting till things come out into the hallway and complain about it then. So we need to. You can build strong alliances within your conference to make sure that the things that we need here in upstate New York are heard. There's not enough representation for rural areas inside the Democratic majority. There are no farmers in the state Senate. I would be the only farmer in the state Senate. So it'd be very useful to be able to be inside the majority party to make sure that not only getting legislation passed like this payments for environmental benefits, but also preventing legislation that really hurts and holds back our upstate areas and our towns. You need to be in that room with the folks, in those initial discussions to make sure that what we need, our priorities are being heard, and they will hear from me.
Thank you. Mr. Oberacker, the issue of majority-minority status.
it harkens back to my business experience. If I were to take the same approach in business, it would be akin to me walking into a brand new customer or potential customer and simply not going in because I do not have the business. So what it takes is actually to build relationships. And that's one of the key parts of being a businessman that I work on. Relationships need to be fostered, need to be established. There has to be a communication and an exchange of ideas. And if the majority, and the only way to be successful is to be in the room and to be in the majority, I would say that the majority that has brought us, there's no doubt, one of the highest tax rates here in the country. The majority that has brought us the disastrous bail reform policies. The majority that's looking at defunding our police and attacking our Second Amendment rights. If that's what being in the room and being at the table brings, then maybe they need a dissenting voice. Maybe they need a little different way to address these issues, and to also fully express the folks here in the 51st. And I believe I am the one to do that. I have the business background to establish those connections, build those relationships, and as a county legislator, I have the experience to do so. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Barber, you'll have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah. So in exactly, those issues, those laws that are being passed that have a negative impact upstate, and the things that they're considering, the way you address those things, the most effective you can be at preventing those kind of things from happening in upstate New York is to be in the room with the majority party. You cannot get that done if you're not at that table. And building relationships with New York City, I've been doing that for 30 years. I've been working with folks in New York City from the time I was in Farm Bureau and vegetable growers, at the state office in Albany, and head of the USDA. So I have relationships already, because food access, clean water, environmental issues, those are all important to folks in New York City. Knowing how to find that common interest is how we successfully built programs like the Farm to School program here in New York State.
Thank you. Mr. Boyer.
All right. I did want to ask you both a little more about cash bail and the changes that have happened in New York State this year. The new law went into effect at the start of the year that eliminated cash bail for most crimes, and the legislature did make some changes to that law to add some additional charges back to make them bail eligible when concerns were raised about dangerous defendants being released. So based on sort of how that's evolved this year, I have a two-part question. One is, is the state's cash bail law in the right place now? Why or why not? And secondly, sort of an underlying question, I guess, is do you believe that cash bail does discriminate against poor people? As that's sort of the underlying justification for the changes that were made.
Mr. Oberacker, you have 2 minutes on this subject.
Thank you. Where does the cash bail system fall short? Number one, it takes the judging out from the judge's hands. My mother was a local judge for 25 plus years in our town. She would be able to know a lot of the background information, a lot of the background story, if you will, about some of the folks that would come before her. And I believe that, number one, the bail reform law as it is currently implemented and written really does take that authority out of our judges' hands. Number two, sitting on the Public Safety Committee for Otsego County, I have seen that a lot of times this is one of the first opportunities that those individuals that have either some sort of a drug addiction, opiate addiction, and we all know opiates right now are skyrocketing across our country and our counties. And it's one of the first opportunities that these folks actually get for some mental health evaluation and to get into a system that actually addresses those those issues. And the way the jail and the cash bail is set up now, they're back right out, they're back in the same element, and it really is a detriment as well, you know, to the individual. So I've seen this firsthand. I believe that the initial intent may have been good, but again, it didn't go from a bottom up. It didn't listen to our sheriffs. It didn't listen to our judges. It didn't listen to those of us at the lower level. It simply pushed down another, not an unfunded mandate, but another mandate from Albany.
Thank you. Mr. Barber, this issue of both cash bail, is it in the right place, and does it disproportionately impact minorities?
So I think actually Mr. Oberacker and I are in pretty close agreement on this issue. It was legislation intended to address what I must believe was an unfair system. It's primarily an urban, downstate issue, I think, but it impacts the entire state. So it's flawed legislation. As he said, they didn't have the right people in the room, the folks with first-hand knowledge of everything that is going on to really craft legislation that would be effective. And it does negatively impact some of the people it's actually designed to try to help. So it needs to be looked at again, and let's make the adjustment so that we do have more discretion for judges. We can find ways to help the people that need help, and beyond just the folks with drug and mental health issues. I know that there are criminals. I was talking to the sheriff actually in Cayuga County, that they'll arrest someone multiple times for almost the same crime, and eventually they're building up to the point where now they're going to be in the felony category, and so they're going to be in a much worse position than if the system had been able to deal with them correctly in the first place. So it needs to be looked at again.
All right, thank you. We're about halfway through, because time flies, for the 51st Senate District Forum. We want to tell our viewers who is in the studio and who's on the phone. We have both candidates for the 51st Senate District. That includes 9 counties. It also includes in Cayuga County the towns of Locke, Moravia, Wasco, Niles, Sempronius, and Summer Hill. We have with us Jim Barber, who is on the Democratic line, as well as Peter Oberacker, who is on the Republican, Conservative, and Independence line. They are both in the studio. We're socially distancing. They have not come out of the hospital. If you look at their hands, they have yellow bands on that said they've gone through the checkpoints here at the college to check their temperature. One person who is not in the studio but is playing a large role in today is Jeremy Boyer, the executive editor of The Citizen, who is asking the questions of each of the candidates. We'll turn back to Mr. Boyer for the last half of the forum.
All right. Well, thank you. Let's move into some fiscal policy and start with the state's budget. There is a roughly about a $13 billion budget gap currently projected for New York, and certainly a lot of that has come from the decrease in revenue and the increase in expense from fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. But there was also quite a bit of imbalance before COVID hit. And so for both of you, my question is, how would you start in on addressing that $13 billion budget gap?
Okay, we'll start with Mr. Barber. You're first.
Right.
You have 2 minutes.
So I actually put out a plan, I think back in May, to address this very issue. It's ironic that it took the economic crisis caused by COVID to give us an opportunity to fix the truly unfair, broken tax system in this state and relieve the burden of property taxes off of our upstate homeowners, farms, and businesses. So our issue is, we have this huge deficit in the state, and they're going to try to figure out, how do we move out of that? Well, currently, in New York City, Wall Street, and big corporations, there's a tremendous amount of economic activity going on that is undertaxed or taxed at a lower rate or not taxed at all. So they are actually paying a lower percentage of their income in taxes than we do through our paychecks or our small businesses. The system is broken. It needs to be fixed. They're using loopholes and gimmicks to just, get away with paying far less than we are. And Wall Street, we know right now, is doing pretty darn well. It's the one sector of this country that's, doing well, and they're not paying their share. So we tap into this revenue stream, and there are a number of, I have a 6-point tax plan on my website, which kind of lays out how this works. The biggest one, of course, is the stock transfer tax, basically the sales tax on buying and selling stocks. That tax actually is on the books. It's been there since 1905. Since 1981, we've been collecting it and rebating it back. We've been giving back to the folks who don't really need it. If we just stop giving that back, that is about $13 billion right there. And there are a number of others that, we close up these loopholes, we can generate enough income in 1 or 2 years to recover from the debt that has been built up over the COVID crisis. That revenue stream, we then use all that it can pay for all their mandates, take that burden off the counties, because right now, Medicaid is about 80% of the county taxes, and we need to take that burden off us.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. Mr. Oberacker, the issue of the state budget and its state budget gap.
Yep, thank you. So again, being a county legislator sitting on our Otsego County Budget Committee, I fully understand and I fully realize what the impact of COVID has had on our local Otsego County budget and how that also extends to the state. The thing that is interesting with looking at trying to cut taxes is really the area to focus in on is on the spending side of the equation. As a former supervisor for the town, those taxes are a huge revenue stream to the local municipality. And if you were to more or less disrupt that initially, it actually has a far-reaching effect into the local municipality, helping to fund, primarily when I was supervisor, about 78% of our budget was in the highway department. And these taxes are literally, through the CHIPS program, a huge purveyor of funds to our local municipalities. We're talking about with the taxes and with a sales tax on stock transactions, you're really talking about a distribution of wealth. Wall Street, would simply add that fee onto stock transactions, so in ultimate, myself or the are they'll be the ones who are actually bearing that burden, which doesn't really accomplish, I think, what was, again, the intended purpose. And as a business, wherever taxes are applied, the business is usually fairly quick and fairly efficient at finding ways to mitigate that. So again, the $13 billion is there. We need to look at our spending side and get an ROI. We need to get a return on our investment for every dollar spent in Albany.
Thank you. Mr. Barber, you'll have 1 minute to respond.
Right. So, first of all, the stock transfer tax is basically the sales tax on the transfer of stocks. So it's paid by the purchaser. So it's not, it's not impacting the businesses in Wall Street. Most folks trading stocks don't even live in New York or even the country. So it's actually revenue coming into the state from outside. The percentage we're proposing is 0.25%. London is double that, 0.5%. They're like the second largest market in the country, in the world. So it's not going to impact Wall Street one bit. But it does certainly help us here, and especially upstate. You relieve the burden of unfunded mandates off our county taxes. That's tremendous. That's 80% reduction in county expenses just in Medicaid alone. We can use that revenue to fund our first responders, to fund community services. We not only does it lower property taxes, it provides a way for the counties to have better services.
Thank you. Mr. Boyer.
All right. Well, in terms of looking at potential spending cuts, one area that has been mentioned and certainly by the governor's budget director is a potential 20% cut in state aid to school districts, and school districts are responding, saying that would be devastating to them. So my question for both of you is, do you believe school aid cuts, maybe if it's not 20%, school aid cuts of any kind should be on or off the table? If you believe they should be on the table, how do you help schools get through the year? If you believe they should be off the table, are there any other areas of spending cuts that you would identify in the state budget before schools?
Mr. Oberacker.
You look at schools in every one of these communities in towns in the 51st, and it really is the center of these towns. It is the heartbeat of those towns. And I can speak firsthand of this. Our school in Skinevus is fiscally distressed, and I've seen how that permeates through the community and the detrimental effects. So would I be for cuts? No. I think we're looking at an ROI, a return on our investment. What better way to invest in what we have in our local communities, but the kids that our children that we are educating. So I would not look at those cuts. Now, that being said, there are going to be some tough times ahead fiscally. We have to tighten our belts, each and every one of us. In my own home, if I were up against these same type of situations, and I knew that there were going to be less revenue coming in, I would have to look to certain cuts. What those cuts are should actually be deemed by I believe by the school boards and by the schools themselves. They know better. They, I believe, are being run efficiently to the point where they know what those what would be a less detrimental cut to that system. And looking at a state budget-wise, where we would cut at the moment. Again, I believe if we were to look at what has always been pushed down from Albany, which is a 2% tax cap, if we were to simply start with a 2% spending cut for all the departments in Albany, it would be amazing as to what I think we could save.
Thank you. Mr. Barber.
Right, yes, and I agree. Cutting, the state is not funding our rural schools through their corridor obligation through the foundation aid as it is. So they're already underfunding our rural upstate schools. So, another 20% cut on top of that. I actually made a public reply to this proposal from the governor. This is insane. Why are we punishing the children in the schools that trying to do this? There are certainly other areas where we can find ways to, reduce spending, and there clearly are ways we can increase revenues. I don't know why the governor is against raising, just so Wall Street pays a fair percentage of tax, something equal to what Warren Buffett's secretary pays. He says it all the time. He pays a lower rate than his secretary. Our system is broken. We do have a tax problem in this state. It's a broken tax system. The folks that are working every day, living through a paycheck, through your small business, you're paying more than the folks that have tremendously high incomes. We need to fix that. It's crazy. I'm tired of subsidizing the folks that are doing well. And yeah, when I was with the USDA, I came in at a time when our budgets were cut 20% in the Great Recession. I found ways to actually improve services through a 20% cut in our budget. We cut in half the amount of time it took to make loan decisions in the agency. We improved the environmental review processes. So there are ways to do better, more efficiently, and let's look at ways of doing that.
Mr. Boyer.
All right, well, let's shift to the COVID-19 pandemic and specifically the state's handling of it. Just on a very broad level, I'd like to hear from both of you on what you think has been done well by state government, what mistakes have been made, and what you think the priorities should be going forward.
Mr. Barber, you have 2 minutes on this.
Okay, well, I think, initially, we have to go back and remember when this first struck, we knew so little not only about the virus, but where it was. I mean, it started out with the outbreak in downstate, but very soon we had cases in every county in New York State. So we didn't know where it was because we didn't have testing. So, they had to take these very dramatic measures just to get it under control so we could figure out where we were in the state with it. And the legislature gave the governor, emergency powers to do that, which probably made sense for, a while when we didn't really know what was going on. But, I mean, come on, it's the legislature's responsibility. They represent every part of this state. So go to Albany, take back your responsibility, take back your powers, and let's make sure that every part of the state is represented in the decision process of dealing with COVID. And we want businesses to open up. Let's follow the science. Let's follow the recommendations that actually work. If everyone wears a mask and be careful, as long as we're just diligent, we can start to open back up. But when you have a lot of careless activity going on and you get these outbreaks, everything starts setting things backwards. We know we can control an outbreak if we do it correctly. Because in SUNY Oneonta, they had like 700 students test positive. But it did not end up being a community spread event because folks were careful, you wear your mask, you isolate, you identify where the issues are. And I understand that, I think the governor just 2 days ago said they're able now to really identify down to the block level, where these outbreaks are, because now we do have testing and we do know more. That's great, because if we can do things by zip code in much smaller areas, we can actually have a much better handle on this problem.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Oberacker,
Thank you.
the state's response.
Yep, I believe the state actually handled the initial outbreak actually very well. You had to be able to understand the dynamics of what we were up against, the sheer numbers, and the negative effect that this pandemic could have had. As a businessman, we're always looking at situations and how they change, and you must change your business plan, for lack of a better word, to those situations. I believe now we're at a point where we really should have what we call a risk-reward type discussion. What are the risks? I think we know them very well by now. We all know about masks, social distancing, sanitation, those type of things. And what would be the reward? The reward is to start opening back up and get this much needed, the sales tax revenues, and I think just a general, the populace needs to get some sort of normalcy, back again. In our company, we have a plan that's called HACCP. It's called Hazard Analysis Critical Control Points. It looks at a process, and in each part of that process, you are defining what can happen, why it can happen, and if it does happen, what is your remedy to do such. I think this type of mentality, I think this type of process, if applied in Albany, would actually start us down the road to looking at opening up safely and prosperously for New York.
Thank you. Mr. Boyer.
Just a short follow-up to that, I think Mr. Barber, you answered it, but just to be clear, and then for Mr. Oberacker, is it your opinion, or is it time for the state legislature to rescind Governor Cuomo's emergency powers that were given to him in March, so the state could react quickly and make decisions related to the pandemic? Is it time to rescind those and kind of bring state government back to the normal way of operating?
We're going to make this a 1-minute response, and because it's the same question, we'll start with Mr. Barber, and then you'll get the next question.
I think I already answered. Yes, they should have done it 4 months ago.
Gotcha. I thought that's what your answer would be, but just to clarify, and then for Mr. Oberacker, your thoughts.
You have a minute.
This will probably be the shortest political 1-minute answer, yes.
All right. Well,
Gotcha.
Mr. Boyer, you got time for 1 or 2 more questions.
All right. Well, let's. I would like to get to water quality. This district has a good chunk of the Owasco Lake watershed in it, and so issues related to nutrient loading, climate change, and the proliferation of harmful algal blooms have been on a lot of people's minds in Cayuga County for several years. Later this month, Auburn and Owasco are scheduled to be voting on a set of new rules and regulations for the watershed. Those rules and regulations would still ultimately need the state health department approval. To the degree that you've been able to tune into this, do you support this effort to change and enhance the rules and regulations in the watershed, and would you advocate for them if elected?
Mr. Oberacker, you have 2 minutes on this subject.
You know, with these type of situations, you've got two engaged entities, if you will. You have the farmers' rights, their needs, their wants. We have the water quality, those that are around the lake, those that draw the drinking water, and look at the economic driver that the lake provides to this area. So you have two entities that can somewhat, I think, get to loggerheads about the situation. First and foremost, communication. We need communication. We need a facilitator to help facilitate that information back and forth to address both those needs as well as we can to the satisfaction of those two entities. Yeah, I would be in favor to look at what those actual requirements would be and how they do affect both of the entities. I think it would take again a more of a facilitator role in this process, and to see where the common ground is first. That's where you start. That's where you start with any type of a negotiation, if you will, and then proceed down the road. The best interest is of all. If we keep that in mind, I think we could be successful.
Thank you. Mr. Barber, on this issue of regulations that Cayuga County is looking to promulgate.
Yes, so as I said earlier, farms can be a real partner in this process, and it needs to be a partnership. You can't just impose additional costs on an industry that's already struggling so much to survive. In the New York City watershed, they know that well-managed farmland is the best land use within a watershed. They have the largest water system in the world, unfiltered, because of the work that they're doing there to make that watershed effective. We can keep replicating that, but it needs to be a way to help the farms survive. You need the farms there to make it work. Now, and it's going to take partnership with the communities. It's a community benefit, and actually it's everyone's benefit to have clean water. So what do we do to help the farms get there, to do their part? And this is, to be clear, this is not all an agricultural issue. The municipalities and homeowners are also part of this issue. So it's a partnership. We can make sure, like I say, we need to compensate the farms for doing good work. There's certain practices, zone tilling, cover crops. If you're going to have a farm put in buffer strips, if they have a dairy farm, they need all that acreage just to feed their animals. So you start taking significant acreage away from a farm, you need to find some way to make sure that farm can survive. So it is a partnership. We need to work together because we all have the same goal. We need a clean environment, clean water. We need an economy that's robust. Farms are a huge part of the economy in upstate New York. So how do we make this all work together? There's a way to do it. Let's all just sit down at a table. We find those common interests. I have a proven record of finding common interests. I've been doing this all my life. So let's sit down and make sure we can get it done.
Thank you. Mr. Boyer, you have a 1-minute question. Time to give our candidates 1 minute each before they go to the closing statement. So if you'll give us a short question, that would be great. And Mr. Barber will go first.
Short
Question.
Okay, I think, I'm not sure how short it'll be, but give it my best shot. Let's talk about economic development under Governor Cuomo. The regional council model has been in place since he's been in office, where we have regions coming together to prioritize projects for state funding, and then regions kind of compete against each other for some of those dollars. So my question to you is, how has the program worked in your mind, and what changes, if any, would you like to see?
So you have 1 minute on the regional economic
Me
development.
first?
Yes, you're going first, and then we'll
So
finish that.
I think just the whole concept of the government deciding which businesses, get financial aid or tax breaks based on who has the best grant writer is a crazy system. Again, if we just had a fair tax system in the entire state that actually, so everyone has a level playing field. The reason that businesses are given tax breaks for 10 years is because we have the highest taxes in the country. We have identified the problem. Let's solve the problem. Let's let every business have a shot at being successful, not just the ones that are chosen because they have a good grant writer or whatever it is to get, to be given the largesse of the state. We need an environment where every business can do well on their own.
Thank you. Mr. Oberacker, this issue of the Regional Economic Development Councils, the Red Seas?
Yeah, economic development there's no doubt it's the lifeblood, it's the future of New York State. One of the things I always thought was kind of interesting is that we kind of go out and tout to get new businesses in, but it costs us quite a bit to do that with pilot programs, payment in lieu of taxes, and incentives to do such. So one of the things that I would like to see us change under true economic development is, why don't we reward those businesses that actually stay? I think they've kind of felt like they've been overlooked. I feel like they feel they're underappreciated, and I think if we were to start there, you build a foundation for true economic growth. And we'll leave it at that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Boyer, thank you for your thoughtful questions. I know you'll be back on Thursday with our other forum, but we're now going to have the candidates give their closing statements. As we said at the beginning, they will go in reverse of how they start. So Peter Oberacker, who is on the Republican, Conservative, and Independent party lines, will go first. Your floor for 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you. And again, I want to thank everybody for the opportunity and the forum to come speak and talk about where my vision, if you will, for the 51st. Again, I go back to, I think, my experience. I go back to my growing up in a family business where you didn't look at the clock. It was what needed to get done. You rolled your sleeves up and you went to work. And I take that to the next level when in my personal business. We were very fortunate to be able to be successful. We have an international business doing business all over the world. We moved that company from Texas to New York, kind of bucking the system, showing that now I've got more or less, as we say, a dog in the hunt. Add that with my background as a local legislator, former town supervisor. I truly understand the impact that Albany has on local municipalities, local budgets, and for that matter, the local people that are in those communities. I think I've proven with my ability to serve at the county level, Chair of Public Works. One of the things I'm the proudest over was negotiating some deals with some cellular companies to get cell service in parts of our county that were under and actually had zero cell service. And I think it just speaks again to the business and legislative experience that I possess. I'm fortunate enough to have a supportive and wonderful wife of 34 years who I married right out of high school. And with that support, with the support of the people from the 51st, I will be your advocate. I will be your voice in Albany.
Thank you, Mr. Oberacker. We'll now hear from Jim Barber, who is on the Democratic Party line. You have 2 minutes, sir.
All right, and again, thank you all for this opportunity. It's been a real pleasure to actually engage in a discussion at this level. I decided to get in this race over a year ago because I knew, upstate New York needed a real voice in Albany, inside the majority conference now. There are very powerful issues we need to address here in upstate New York. We need someone with the vision to find solutions. I have that vision. We need someone with the skills to build relationships. Again, I have those skills. I have a proven record of doing that. We need to have someone with an effective voice for upstate New York. And the way you have an effective voice is to be in the room with the Senate majority making those decisions. Again, that was the reason Jim Seward was effective for 30 years, because he was a member of the majority party. We need to make sure that upstate New York continues to have a voice in Albany and a seat at that table, because we have too much at stake here. And I can be at that table in the Senate, protecting our upstate priorities, defending our upstate values, and making sure that what we need here is really can be achieved. I promise I am going to serve these taxpayers with every ounce of my energy. That's just how I'm built. That's how a farm survives for 6 generations. You get in there, you do the work, and you work hard every single day. So if you want someone who's going to bring common sense to Albany, who has a plan to actually make upstate New York stronger and work hard for the taxpayers every single day, then I'm asking you to vote for me in November or tomorrow. So.
Thank you, sir. Thank you both for joining us. We know it was a drive for both of you, so this is a large district. We wish you well on the campaign trail, but more importantly, we want to thank you for running. It's not always an easy task for you or your families, so we thank you, and good luck in the intervening 2 weeks from today as we tape this. Again, we'd like to thank Mr. Boyer for his questions, always thoughtful and perceptive as usual. He will be back in the studio in a couple of days as we continue our series. But we more importantly want to thank you for taking the time to watch the candidates for this Senate race, the 51st.